Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if the fancy tools we use to analyze data are really up to the job, especially when things get messy? That is the big question these researchers asked. They looked at different ways to do Bayesian regularization, which is a fancy way of saying how do we shrink down our statistical models to make them better fit complex data, but also make sure they don't get too weird or complicated. And they wanted to see how these methods worked when the actual data wasn't as simple as we might pretend it is in our models. Exactly, we often assume our models are perfect, but real-world data is almost never perfect. It has quirks, nonlinearities, things that just don't fit a straight line. So they wanted to test these Bayesian methods, which are known for giving us probabilities for everything. Under tough conditions, they picked three main types of shrinkage priors: the horseshoe, the Laplace, and the normal prior. Think of these like different strategies for telling the model to ignore less important factors. The horseshoe is like a super strict but flexible rule. The Laplace is like a good all-rounder aiming for sparsity, and the normal is like a gentler, smoother approach. Here is how they tested it. Imagine you have a bunch of data points. First, they created some data that fit a nice simple linear model. That is layer 1, the easy scenario. Then they got creative. For layer 2, they deliberately made the data messy. They added curves, step-like changes, interactions between different factors, and noise that changed depending on the signal. It's like taking a perfectly tidy spreadsheet and then scribbling all over it with different colored pens in complex patterns. They wanted to see if the Bayesian methods could handle this messy data. And they used a lot of potential predictors, 2,000 of them. This is like having a giant list of possible reasons for something, and you need your method to figure out which ones are actually important. So how did they measure success? They looked at predictive accuracy. Can the model guess new data points well? That is measured by R² and RMSE, which are basically scores for how good the predictions are. Then they looked at variable selection. Can the method pick out the truly important predictors from that huge list of 2,000? They use 95% credible intervals, which is a Bayesian way of saying we're 95% sure the true value is in this range. If the range doesn't include 0, they consider that predictor important. Finally, they checked selection stability. If they ran the whole thing again, would they pick the same important predictors? They did this many times, over 30 replications, to make sure their results weren't just a fluke. Now for the juicy results. At the largest sample size, with 10,000 data points, the Horseshoe and Laplace priors did a pretty decent job. They got a decent R² score, meaning they could explain over half the variability in the data, even with all that messiness in layer 2. But the normal prior, that gentler approach, it failed miserably. The R² was way negative, meaning its predictions were worse than just guessing the average. It was like bringing a butter knife to a battle. Here's where it gets really interesting, and a bit disappointing for one of the goals. Even though the Horseshoe and Laplace priors were good at predicting, they weren't very good at picking out just the important predictors. In most cases, they ended up selecting almost all 2,000 of them. This means variable selection, which is often a key goal, became pretty useless in this setup. It is like asking a detective to find the killer, and they bring you a list of everyone in the city. And the stability of these selections, it was high. Meaning if you ran the analysis again, you'd get pretty much the same list of almost all predictors. But this high stability wasn't because they were finding the true few important variables consistently. It was just because they were consistently picking almost everything. So what does this all mean? The researchers concluded that the default settings of these Bayesian tools, especially when using a speedy approximation method called variational inference, are actually pretty good for prediction. If you have a lot of data and the data is messy, that is a big win for applied researchers who deal with complex real-world data. And this is crucial, but if your goal is to pinpoint exactly which few variables are important, these default settings are unreliable. You'd need to fine-tune them or use more sophisticated methods to get a more accurate picture of the posterior, which is like the full probability distribution of what is going on. This is the most important takeaway for anyone using these tools. You can't just blindly trust the default setting. You really need to think about what you are trying to achieve with your analysis. Are you trying to predict things really well, or are you trying to understand the underlying causes and identify key drivers? The tools that are great for one might not be great for the other. One of the biggest issues they ran into, especially with getting sparse variable selection, was with the variational inference part. This is a faster, approximate way of doing Bayesian calculations instead of the slower, more accurate method called MCMC that stands for Markov Chain Monte Carlo. They found that this faster approximation might be losing some crucial information, especially about the tails of the probability distributions that are important for identifying truly sparse solutions. They also hit some technical snags. The Laplace Prior, which is like the Bayesian version of the lasso, showed some weird behavior with a moderate sample size. The results were so extreme, like numbers with 30 zeros, that they were clearly useless. This highlights that even with these advanced methods, numerical issues can crop up, especially when you are pushing the boundaries. It's a reminder that these are complex computational tools. The failure of the normal prior really hammers home a point that is known in both frequentist and Bayesian statistics. When you have way more predictors than data points, simple shrinkage methods like a basic Gaussian prior just aren't enough to prevent overfitting. You need something more sophisticated, like the Horseshoe or Laplace, to really reign in the model. My take on this research is that it is super important. It's like taking these powerful statistical tools, which are becoming more accessible, and giving them a real-world stress test. The fact that the Horseshoe and Laplace priors performed well for prediction, even with messy data, is a testament to their strength. However, the failure in variable selection with default settings is a critical warning. It means that users need to be more sophisticated than just plugging in data and hitting run. They need to understand the trade-offs, especially between accuracy and computational speed with methods like variational inference, and match the method to their specific research question. If you need precise variable selection, you might need to lean towards MaxEMC or specialized variable selection algorithms, or really dive deep into tuning the priors. And looking ahead, it is interesting that they couldn't even test a more complex method called spike and slab, which is often very good for variable selection because of computational limits. This suggests that there is still a lot of work to be done to make these powerful Bayesian methods both accurate and computationally feasible, especially for variable selection under misspecification. Ultimately, this research is a call for critical thinking. As these tools get easier to use, the danger of misinterpreting results grows. It is crucial to understand what you are doing, why you are doing it, and what the limitations of your chosen methods are. This kind of work helps us all become better consumers and producers of scientific research. So what do you think about these findings? Are you surprised that prediction worked well, but variable selection didn't? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science insights, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of research. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.